Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. And to do that, we need to travel back to a dark, cold, and just incredibly isolated night in 1966. We're heading deep into the Appalachian landscape. You know, the kind of place where the trees are thick, the shadows seem to stretch just a little bit longer, and where a localized campfire story somehow spiraled into an absolute international phenomenon. But listen, today we aren't just going to tell you a ghost story. No way. We are going to completely gut this legend. We're going to tear down the myth piece by piece and look at the very real, very tragic human cost that ended up getting completely overshadowed by a monster.
So picture this for a second. It's near midnight, and you're driving down a twisting, pitch-black dirt road just outside the small, quiet town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. You're entering an area the locals simply call the TNT area. It's actually the McClintock Wildlife Management Area, but it's this eerie, overgrown expanse dotted with over 100 massive, steel-reinforced concrete igloos. During World War II, the U.S. Army used these incredibly thick, domed bunkers to store highly explosive TNT. But now, in 1966, they just sit there, completely abandoned, slowly being swallowed by the forest. It's the kind of place practically begging for a monster to take up residence in the dark. So, what actually haunts these backroads? Well, the answer to that depends entirely on whether you believe in demons or if you just believe in the overwhelming power of human panic.
The timeline of this terror happens with just blistering speed. It kicks off on November 12th. 5 men are out digging a grave in nearby Clendenin when they spot this massive, shadowy figure just gliding silently through the trees above them. Spooky, right? But the real spark, the one that blows this wide open, hits on November 15th. 2 young married couples, the Scarberrys and the Millettes, are taking a midnight drive through that creepy abandoned TNT area. Suddenly, they see something lurking near an old generator plant. They absolutely panic, slam on the gas, and tear out of the woods. But this thing, it follows them. It literally keeps pace with their speeding car. The very next day, November 16th, the local press holds a press conference with these terrified couples. A copy editor jokingly dubs the creature the Mothman, mostly just to capitalize on the wildly popular Batman TV show that was airing at the time. And just like that, the spark ignites an absolute wildfire of mass hysteria.
Now, to truly understand how this gripped the entire town, you really have to look at the sheer, genuine terror these young witnesses felt, because this wasn't a joke to them. One of the witnesses described it so vividly, saying, "It was shaped like a man, but bigger. It had 2 big eyes like automobile reflectors." They were so intensely frightened that they drove straight to the police station in the middle of the night. They were literally paralyzed with fear. Whatever they saw out there in the pitch black, they believed in it with every single fiber of their being.
And honestly, when you look at the monster's profile, it is pure nightmare fuel. According to the escalating reports, this wasn't just some big bird. We're talking about a bipedal creature standing over 7 feet tall with a massive 10-foot wingspan folded flat against its back. The creepiest part? It had no visible head. Instead, 2 massive, hypnotic, glowing red eyes were set deep right into its shoulders. And when it flew, it didn't flap its wings. Witnesses claimed it shot straight up into the air like a helicopter and just glided, easily chasing terrified teenagers down Route 62 at speeds topping 100 miles per hour. If you're a resident of this small, tight-knit community, that profile is utterly terrifying.
For 13 agonizing months, the town of Point Pleasant was essentially trapped in a living horror movie. Over 1,000 eyewitness sightings were reported. That abandoned TNT area, it turned into an absolute circus. Police reported over 1,000 people swarming those dark bunkers at night, armed with shotguns and heavy flashlights, desperate to hunt the Mothman. The local press started putting these crazy stories out on the Associated Press wire, and before long, television crews and paranormal tourists from all over the country were descending on this rural town. The tension was at an absolute boiling point. The entire community was looking up at the dark skies, just waiting for this monster to strike. But you guys, the real horror wasn't in the sky at all.
46. I just want to pause right here and let that number sink in for a second, because this is exactly where the spooky ghost story ends and devastating, heartbreaking reality begins. 46 is not the number of monster sightings. It is the number of real, innocent human lives that were violently cut short on a Friday evening.
On December 15, 1967, at exactly 4:58 p.m., the Silver Bridge, which was the main artery connecting Point Pleasant to Ohio, collapsed. It was 10 days before Christmas. Rush hour traffic was bumper to bumper, and in less than 60 seconds, that massive suspension bridge folded up like a deck of cards. 31 vehicles plummeted directly into the freezing 44-degree waters of the Ohio River. Witnesses described it like someone pushing over a line of dominoes, followed by a great big splash, the flashing of sinking headlights beneath the water, and then just absolute silence. 46 people died that night. 2 bodies were never even found. To this day, it remains the deadliest bridge disaster in United States history.
Now, the intense, rigorous scientific investigation that followed is what completely guts the supernatural monster theory. The National Transportation Safety Board stepped in and initiated one of the most thorough forensic investigations ever conducted up to that point. And you know what they found? They didn't find demon claws, they didn't find cryptid sabotage, they found a microscopic flaw. See, the Silver Bridge was built back in 1928, using a really unique design with steel eye-bars instead of standard wire cables. Well, eye-bar 33, right at joint C13N, had developed a tiny cleavage fracture. This was caused by years of stress corrosion from industrial air pollutants like hydrogen sulfide from nearby plants. Because the bridge had zero redundancy in its design, the literal fraction of a second that single rusted eye-bar snapped, the entire suspension system was instantly disrupted, and the towers just collapsed. It was pure, tragic, mechanical failure. Nothing more.
And the true, factual legacy of this horrible day? It wasn't some paranormal prophecy. Following the disaster, the government took immediate direct action. This massive tragedy led directly to the creation of the National Bridge Inspection Standards. Because of what happened to those people at Point Pleasant, every single bridge in the United States was suddenly subjected to rigorous, mandatory inspections. Dozens of other bridges were found to be critically deficient and were immediately repaired or replaced. So the one silver lining of the Silver Bridge disaster is that it undoubtedly saved thousands of lives across the country. That is the grounded, factual reality of this event.
And honestly, this whole situation brilliantly illustrates how easily human fear can morph reality. Let's look at the myth versus the biology for a second. People swore up and down they saw a demonic winged cryptid. But let's look at the actual wildlife in that area. The TNT area is literally a bird sanctuary. A large sandhill crane, which stands quite tall and has a massive wingspan, could easily have veered off its normal migration path. Or actually, even more likely, the culprit was just a barred owl or a snowy owl. And what about those terrifying glowing red eyes? Well, it's a very common biological phenomenon called retinal eye shine. When high-beam headlights hit an owl's retinas in the pitch black, they reflect back this brilliant, glowing red light. Add in the high adrenaline and stress of a midnight joyride, and a displaced owl very quickly becomes a 7-foot demon.
So, you might be wondering, what does this all mean? How did a biological misunderstanding get inextricably linked to a horrific bridge collapse? Well, the answer lies in 14ism and confirmation bias. Enter John Keel. He was a New York journalist and ufologist who arrived in Point Pleasant right as the panic was peaking. Keel was a 14, meaning he was someone who deeply believed in interconnected paranormal anomalies. He didn't come to town looking for a lost bird. He came looking for UFOs and men in black. He took the terrified accounts of the locals and just filtered them entirely through his own extreme biases. He decided that the monster, the UFO sightings, some weird local phone calls, and eventually the devastating bridge collapse itself were all part of one grand supernatural tapestry. He basically hijacked the town's mechanical tragedy and framed it as a paranormal prophecy.
And Keel's framing directly built the foundation for Hollywood's narrative hijacking. Keel published his book, The Mothman Prophecies, in 1975, which, as you probably know, eventually became a massive 2002 Hollywood movie starring Richard Gere. In that transition, the reality of a mechanical bridge failure caused by air pollution corrosion was completely erased. Instead, Hollywood sold tickets by claiming the Mothman was this global harbinger of doom who sends premonitions to humans. The movie even totally fabricated a story that the Mothman was seen just before the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. I mean, cryptozoologists later had to publicly clarify that the Chernobyl Mothman was pure Hollywood fiction invented strictly to make the movie scarier. The truth was just completely sacrificed for entertainment.
The sociological impact of this is actually fascinating. Academic journals have extensively analyzed what happened to Point Pleasant, noting this distinct phenomenon of narrative hijacking. This describes the deeply unsettling process where a very real historical event, again the tragic deaths of 46 people, is completely overshadowed by a fabricated legend. Through a process experts call folklorization, the outside world essentially stripped the town of its actual grief and replaced it with a spooky campfire story. The narrative no longer belonged to the families who lost their loved ones. It belonged to Hollywood, to paperback authors, and to paranormal enthusiasts who were just looking for a thrill.
And the sheer absurdity of this narrative hijacking is perfectly captured right here. Over time, the Mothman transitioned from a terrifying demonic harbinger of death into a highly commodified pop culture icon. Today, it's celebrated in the LGBTQ community as an icon for social weirdness.
It's a plush toy you can buy on Etsy. It's a cute little cartoon on a t-shirt. The sheer cognitive dissonance of taking a creature that supposedly predicted the horrific drowning of 46 people and turning it into an adorable, huggable stuffed animal is just wild. It is a stunning example of how capitalism and pop culture can digest and sanitize even the darkest of local traumas.
But honestly, what is a small, economically struggling Appalachian town supposed to do? When the bridge collapsed, it cut off vital economic traffic for a long time. Decades later, when the movie brought this massive influx of tourists, the town realized they had to adapt. So they turned the monster into a cryptid cash cow. Today, there's a dedicated Mothman museum created by a local named Jeff Walmsley. There are hayride bus tours right through the creepy TNT area. They host an annual festival that draws up to 15,000 tourists who come to eat Mothman pancakes and buy Mothman merchandise. They even erected a gleaming 12-foot stainless steel statue of the creature, complete with chiseled abs, by the way, that tourists literally line up down the street to take selfies with. It is an incredible economic pivot that physically sustains the town today.
Yet, when you visit Point Pleasant today, you are confronted with a deeply uncomfortable contrast in how we remember history. Down by the riverside, tucked away, there is a simple, modest, quiet plaque. It lists the names of the 46 victims of the Silver Bridge collapse, offering a solemn, respectful space for remembrance. But then, just a few blocks away, standing tall in the absolute center of town, is that massive, gleaming metal statue of the Mothman, drawing the crowds, the cameras, and the cash. It is a stark visual representation of the battle between actual painful human memory and highly profitable mythology.
Which brings us to a final, really provocative thought. We know the Mothman was likely just a lost owl, amplified by fear, a tragically timed collapsing bridge, and a journalist looking to sell a paranormal story. We know the legend entirely hijacked the town's actual grief. But today, the town uses that very same monster to keep its economy alive and thriving. So I leave you with this. When a community has to survive by selling the fictional monster that hijacked the darkest, most tragic day in its history, who is really haunting who? Thank you for joining me on this explainer. Until next time, keep asking the hard questions and always look past the myth to find the truth.